The worst part was not the emptiness. The worst part was knowing that something used to live where the emptiness now sat. Like a house after a fire. The walls still stood, but nothing warm remained inside. Rami Hadid had not cried in 9 years. He had not laughed either. He had not felt his heart race, or his stomach drop, or his skin prickle with goosebumps when something beautiful crossed his path. The sedation implant behind his right ear made sure of that. A tiny device, no bigger than a fingernail, pressed against his skull and fed a constant stream of chemical suppression into his bloodstream. It kept his adrenaline flat. It kept his emotions dull. It kept him safe. That was the word they used. Safe. Not safe for him. Safe for everyone else. He worked on Dawnmere Station, a trading hub that orbited a gas giant in the mid-rim territories of the Galactic Cooperative. Thousands of aliens lived and worked there. Tessavari with their crystalline skin and tall, fragile bodies. Finuki with 4 arms and nervous dispositions. Garathi, broad and heavy and loud. Dranaki traders with chitinous shells clicking through the market corridors. And among them, scattered like ghosts, the humans. There were 19 humans on Dawnmere. All of them wore implants. All of them worked low-level jobs. Cargo loading, sanitation, maintenance crawls through spaces too cramped for larger species. They moved slowly. They spoke softly. They looked at the ground when other species passed. Not because anyone told them to. Because the implant stole the fire that would have made them look up. Rami loaded cargo containers in Bay 14, 6 days a week, 12 hours a shift. He lifted crates that weighed more than most Tessavari could manage. His body was still strong. Human muscle and bone did not care about sedation. They were built on a death world, forged by gravity and predators and weather that could kill in minutes. His body remembered what it was. His mind was not allowed to. During his break, he sat in the medbay supply closet and folded bandages. Nobody asked him to. Nobody needed him to. But his hands did it anyway, rolling the white strips into tight, perfect cylinders the way someone had taught him a long time ago. He could not remember who. The implant blurred old memories too, not erasing them but wrapping them in fog so thick that reaching for one felt like grabbing smoke. Drell found him there, as usual. The Finuki medic was small, barely reaching Rami's chest, with soft gray fur and 4 arms that always seemed to be doing 3 things at once. Drell carried a scanner and waved it behind Rami's ear with practiced efficiency. "Your serotonin is low again," Drell said. "It is always low," Rami replied. "Lower than usual, even for a sedated human." Drell hesitated, 2 of his hands fidgeting while the other 2 held the scanner steady. "Do you feel unwell?" Rami considered the question. Feeling unwell required feeling something. "I am fine," he said. Drell looked at him for a long moment. There was something in the medic's wide, dark eyes that Rami could not identify. Concern, perhaps. But the implant made it hard to read emotions in others when he could not recognize them in himself. "You fold those bandages very precisely," Drell said quietly. "Like someone trained you. Maybe someone did. Do you remember?" Rami looked down at his hands. They were large and scarred and steady. They knew things. He was certain of that. They knew how to apply pressure to a wound, how to stabilize a broken limb, how to pull a person from wreckage. He did not know how he knew this. The knowledge lived in his muscles, not his mind. "No," he said. "I do not remember." Drell left. Rami finished the bandages and returned to Bay 14. The shift continued. Crates moved. Hours passed. The station hummed with the low vibration of life support and commerce, and 10,000 beings going about their business, none of them noticing the quiet human who carried their freight. At the end of his shift, Rami walked to the observation deck on level 12. He did this every night. The viewport stretched from floor to ceiling, a massive window that looked out onto the gas giant below. It was enormous, banded in shades of amber and rust, its storms swirling in patterns that had existed longer than most civilizations. It was, by any reasonable measure, one of the most beautiful things in the galaxy. Rami pressed his hand against the glass. It was cold. He could feel that much. Temperature still registered. Pain still registered, though it arrived late and muted, like a letter delivered to the wrong address. He stared at the giant and waited for something. A feeling, a reaction, a whisper of whatever used to live inside him before the implant turned it all to static. He waited the way a person waits at a grave, knowing nothing will answer, but hoping anyway. Nothing came. He lowered his hand. He turned to leave, and then the proximity alarm screamed. Every light on the observation deck flashed red. The station shuddered, a deep, structural groan that Rami felt through the soles of his boots. Announcements erupted in 6 languages. Emergency barriers began slamming shut across the corridors like steel jaws snapping closed. Rami stood still. The alarm pounded through his dulled senses. Somewhere far away, past the fog of the implant, something stirred. Something old. Something that remembered what alarms meant. But the implant held it down, and Rami just stood there, watching the red lights flash across the glass, his own reflection staring back at him with empty eyes. Something was coming, and he could not even feel afraid. The first thing that came back was sound. Not the muffled, distant version of sound that the implant allowed. Real sound. Raw sound. The kind that hit the eardrums like a fist and traveled straight down the spine. The shriek of tearing metal. The hiss of atmosphere venting through a hull breach somewhere below. The wet, rapid clicking of something alive and hungry moving inside the walls. Rami was on the floor of Cargo Bay 14. He did not remember falling. There was blood on his hand, warm and bright, and when he touched the right side of his head, his fingers found torn skin and something else. Fragments. Small, sharp pieces of a device that had controlled his brain chemistry for 9 years, now scattered in his hair like broken teeth. The shrapnel had killed his implant. He tried to stand, and the world rushed in. Colors slammed into his vision with an intensity that made him stagger. The emergency lights were not just red. They were screaming red, violent red, the kind of red that existed specifically to tell a human brain that death was close. The air tasted like copper and burning plastic. The floor vibrations told a story his sedated mind would have ignored, but his unsedated body read instantly. Structural failure. Lower decks. Spreading upward. And then the emotions hit. They did not come one at a time. They came all at once. 9 years of suppressed feeling released in a single flood. Fear arrived first. Real fear, the kind that made his hands shake and his vision tunnel. Then anger. Enormous and hot, rising from somewhere he had forgotten existed. Then grief. Grief so sudden and so heavy that it buckled his knees and put tears on his face before he understood why he was crying. Noor. The name surfaced from the fog like a body rising from deep water. His sister, 23 years old. Brown eyes. A laugh that could fill a room. Buried under concrete and rebar in a building collapse in Beirut, while he clawed at the rubble with his bare hands and screamed her name until his voice broke. He had left Earth because of her. He had accepted the implant because feeling her absence was worse than feeling nothing at all. And now the implant was gone, and she was back, and so was everything else. Rami grabbed a support beam and pulled himself upright. His body was shaking. Every nerve was firing. His heartbeat was so loud in his ears that it almost drowned out the clicking in the walls. Almost. Drell appeared from behind a toppled cargo stack, all 4 arms wrapped around a medical kit, gray fur standing on end. The Finuki's wide eyes found Rami and went wider. Your implant, Drell whispered. Rami, your implant is gone. I know. Your eyes. They are. I have never seen a human's eyes look like that. Rami did not know what his eyes looked like. He knew what they felt like. They felt like they were seeing for the first time. Every shadow had depth. Every surface had texture. The world had gone from flat photograph to a living, breathing, 3-dimensional scream. Drell fumbled in his kit and produced a sedation patch, a temporary adhesive strip that could suppress human neurochemistry for 6 hours. He held it out with trembling hands. Put this on, please. Before you dash, before I what? Drell swallowed. Before you become what they say you are. Rami looked at the patch. 6 hours of nothing. 6 hours of fog and silence, and the comfortable prison he had lived in since Nur died. Part of him wanted it. The grief was too big. The fear was too sharp. Everything was too much. Then a scream cut through the station. Not an alarm, not a mechanical failure. A living voice, high and desperate and afraid, coming from the direction of the residential block. Something inside Rami shifted. The grief and the fear did not disappear, but something older and stronger rose up beneath them. Something that had been there before the implant, before everything. An instinct written into human DNA by a million years on a world that tried to kill them every single day. Someone was in danger, and Rami's body knew exactly what to do about it. He pushed the sedation patch away. Not yet. Rami dash. People are in danger, Drell. The security forces will handle dash. Another scream. Closer. More desperate. And beneath it, that clicking sound. Louder now, a swarm of something pouring through the corridors like a living flood. Rami turned and ran. Not the slow, careful movement of a sedated human. He ran the way humans were built to run, upright and fast and relentless. A persistence predator unleashed in a metal corridor, every muscle firing with the explosive power of a species that had chased prey across savannas until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. Drell watched him go. The Finuki had worked with humans for years. He had seen them shuffle and mumble and stare at floors. He had read the files. Class, 7 Deathworlder. Sedation required. Dangerous if unsuppressed. He had always thought it was exaggeration. He did not think that anymore. The sound of Rami's boots hitting the deck echoed through the corridor like a war drum, and Drell stood frozen in the cargo bay, holding a sedation patch that no one was coming back for, and understood for the first time that the galaxy had no idea what it had been keeping in a cage. He could hear them breathing, not just the survivors. The swarm. The brood swarm organisms moved through the station like a living current. Thousands of insectoid bodies flowing through ventilation shafts and maintenance corridors, and every gap wider than a fist. They made a sound when they moved together. A clicking, chittering hum that vibrated through the walls and floor and settled into the bones of anyone close enough to hear it. Rami heard all of it. Every layer. Every frequency. 9 years of dulled senses had ended, and now his ears picked up things that would have been background noise before. The difference between load-bearing walls groaning under stress and decorative panels rattling loose. The pitch change in the swarms clicking when they found something alive. The rhythm of terrified breathing coming from behind the emergency barrier at the end of Corridor 7. He reached the residential block in under 2 minutes. The corridor was wrecked. Ceiling panels hung like broken ribs. Emergency lighting cast everything in deep red. The energy barrier at the far end was flickering, its generator damaged, blue light stuttering on and off like a dying heartbeat. Behind it, pressed against the back wall, were 11 aliens. 3 Tessavari adults, their crystalline skin reflecting the red emergency lights in fractured patterns. 4 Finuki huddled together in a knot of gray fur and trembling arms. 2 Garathi standing shoulder to shoulder, trying to look brave and failing. And 2 small Tessavari children clinging to each other on the floor. In front of the barrier stood a single Tessavari guard. He held a stun baton in one hand and nothing in the other. His crystalline face was cracked with stress fractures, the Tessavari equivalent of going pale with fear. He was staring at the swarm drones pressing against the barrier, their mandibles scraping the energy field, testing it, and he was not moving. Not because he was holding the line. Because he was frozen. Rami had seen that look before. On Earth. In disaster zones and collapsed sites and burning buildings. The look of someone whose training had not prepared them for reality. He grabbed a broken conduit pipe from the floor. It was heavy. Steel alloy, meant to carry coolant between decks. About 1 meter long. It was not a weapon. But in the hands of a human running on 9 years of unleashed adrenaline, it did not need to be. Get behind me, Rami said to the guard. The Tessavari turned and stared. His eyes, pale blue and luminous, went wide. Humans did not speak like that. Humans did not stand like that. Humans shuffled and murmured and looked at the floor. Now, Rami said, and something in his voice, some frequency that evolution had tuned specifically to command attention in moments of crisis, made the guard move without thinking. The barrier flickered and died. The swarm poured through. Rami swung. The first drone shattered against the pipe like a clay pot. The second hit him in the chest, and he grabbed it with his free hand, crushed its thorax, and threw it into the three behind it. The impact scattered them. He stepped forward into the gap and swung again, backhand, forehand. Overhead, each strike driven by a body that had evolved to throw rocks and spears and punches for 2 million years. He was not graceful. He was not trained in alien combat techniques or energy weapon systems. He was a cargo loader with a pipe, and he fought like what he was. A human. Loud, bloody, stubborn, and absolutely refusing to stop. A drone latched onto his left forearm and bit down. Pain exploded up his arm, real pain, bright and sharp and immediate. He felt it completely, and instead of slowing him down, it made him faster. Adrenaline surged. His vision narrowed. His muscles flooded with oxygen-rich blood, and his heart hammered at a rate that would have killed a Finucci. He ripped the drone off his arm, taking skin with it, and kept swinging. It lasted less than 3 minutes. When it was over, the corridor was littered with broken swarm drones, and Rami was standing in the middle of them, bleeding from his arm, his ribs, and a cut above his left eye. He was breathing hard, chest heaving, the pipe still raised. The aliens behind him had not moved. They stared at him the way prey animals stare at a predator that has just killed a rival predator on their behalf, grateful and terrified in equal measure. Then Rami lowered the pipe. He turned around, and his face changed. The fury drained out his eyes. His shoulders dropped. His breathing slowed, and he knelt down in front of the two Tessavari children on the floor and said, in a voice so gentle it barely carried, "Are you hurt? Can you show me where hurts?" One of the children, a small girl with skin like blue quartz, pointed to a cut on her arm. Rami examined it with steady hands, hands that had just beaten a swarm of alien predators into pieces. He tore a strip from his own shirt, cleaned the wound, and wrapped it with the careful precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. "There," he said. "You are very brave." The child stared at him. Then she reached out and touched his face, her small crystal fingers tracing the blood on his cheek with the curiosity of someone encountering something completely new. Behind Rami, Drell arrived at the corridor entrance, out of breath and shaking. He saw the carnage. He saw the survivors. He saw Rami kneeling on the floor, bandaging a child with the same hands that had just killed with raw animal violence. And Drell understood something that no galactic textbook had ever taught him. The sedation did not just suppress the danger. It suppressed the love. And you could not have one without the other. That was what made humans terrifying. That was what made humans beautiful. They carried both inside them at the same time, and they chose every single second which one to unleash. Then Rami lifted his head. His expression shifted. He was listening to something. "There is someone else," he said, 2 levels down. "I can hear them." A child's scream, thin and distant, rising from the station's lower decks. Rami stood up. The blood was still wet on his hands. He was already moving. The maintenance levels smelled like rust and heat. Pipes ran along the ceiling in thick bundles, dripping condensation that hissed when it hit the hot deck plates below. Most species on Dawnmere Station never came down here. The temperature alone kept them away. Tessavari's skin cracked in sustained heat. Finucci neural tissue degraded above 40 degrees. Even the Garathi, thick-skinned and sturdy, avoided the lower decks because the narrow corridors made their broad shoulders scrape against the walls. Rami fit perfectly. Humans were built for exactly this. Compact enough to crawl through tight spaces. Heat-tolerant enough to function where other species collapsed. And stubborn enough to keep going when every reasonable instinct said to turn back. He followed the sound. A child's cry, thin and broken, rising from somewhere in the utility section of Level 3. The swarm's clicking was distant down here, muffled by layers of metal and insulation. They had concentrated their assault on the upper levels where the food stores and warm bodies were. The maintenance levels were too hot and too empty to interest them, but not empty enough. Rami found the utility room by following scratch marks on the floor. Someone had dragged heavy equipment against the door from the inside. He knocked twice and said, "I am human. I am here to help." Silence. Then a voice, tight with fear, speaking in accented common. Go away. Please. We are not the swarm. We are not with them. I know, Rami said. Open the door. A long pause. Then the scraping of metal being moved, and the door opened a crack. A single eye looked out at him. Large, compound, faceted like dark amber. An insectoid eye, but not a brood swarm eye. Sifra was a Dranaki trader. She stood slightly taller than Rami, with a smooth chitinous shell the color of dark copper and 4 slender arms folded tight against her body. She looked nothing like the brood swarm drones. The Dranaki were elegant, intelligent, civilized. But she was insectoid. She had mandibles. She had compound eyes. And she knew exactly what would happen when frightened aliens started making decisions based on what something looked like rather than what it was. Behind her, clinging to her thorax, were her 2 children. Small, soft-shelled, their chitin not yet hardened. They clicked in rapid distress, a sound so similar to the brood swarms clicking that Rami understood immediately why Sifra had hidden. They will kill us, Sifra said. Not a question, a statement, delivered with the flat certainty of someone who had done the math and found no good answers. When the security forces sweep the station, they will see us and they will not ask questions. They will see mandibles and they will shoot. Rami looked at her, at her children, whose tiny legs gripped their mother's shell and whose compound eyes were wet with something that crossed every species barrier in the galaxy. Fear. Pure, simple, universal fear. And somewhere inside him, a door that the implant had sealed shut for 9 years swung open. Not the door of rage or survival instinct. A different one, older, deeper. Nur had been 23. She had been trapped under concrete for 11 hours before her heart stopped. He had been told, later, that she had probably been conscious for most of it, calling for him, waiting for him, believing until the very end that her brother would come. He had not come in time. He looked at Sifra's children, and the memory hit him so hard that he had to brace himself against the doorframe. He was shaking again, not from adrenaline this time, from something heavier. I will get you out, he said. His voice cracked. He did not try to hide it. Stay behind me. Stay close. I will not let anyone hurt your children. Sifra studied him for a long moment. Dranaki were good at reading body language. They had evolved to detect sincerity and threat in equal measure. Whatever she saw in Rami's face, in his posture, in the tears that were still drying on his cheeks, it was enough. She stepped out. Her children clicked softly. Rami led the way. They moved upward through the maintenance shafts. Rami found others along the way. A Garathi mechanic named Burel, whose leg was broken at the knee, dragging himself along the floor with both massive arms. Rami fashioned a splint from conduit tubing and helped him stand. 2 Tessavari children, barely older than toddlers, hiding inside a ventilation junction. Rami carried one in each arm, and they clung to his neck with their small crystal fingers, their faces pressed against his chest. A Finuki merchant sat in a corridor junction, rocking back and forth, all 4 hands covering his face. He had seen the swarm take his business partner. He could not stop shaking. Rami knelt beside him, put a hand on his shoulder, and spoke in a low, steady voice. He said things that were not complicated or philosophical. He said, "You are alive. We are going somewhere safe. I need you to walk. Can you walk for me?" The merchant walked. By the time Rami reached the central hub, he had 14 survivors behind him. He was carrying 2 children, supporting a limping Garathi, and leading a Dranaki family whose very appearance could get them killed by friendly forces. He was bleeding from 6 different wounds. He had not slowed down once. Overseer Palin was in the central hub, surrounded by what remained of station command. When the doors opened and Rami walked in, the Tessavari bureaucrat stared as if he was seeing something from a nightmare. "Your implant," Palin said. "Where is your implant?" "Broken. That is a violation of Galactic Cooperative Statute - Your station is being eaten alive," Rami said. He set the 2 Tessavari children down gently, carefully, and then he looked Palin directly in the eye. The overseer flinched. Unsedated human eyes were something he had only seen in warning holographs during administrative training. "Your security failed," Rami said. Your barriers failed. Your protocols failed. I did not. Now, let me work, or get out of my way." The room went silent. Every alien in the central hub was staring at the human cargo loader who stood before them covered in blood and holding broken children with gentle hands. Palin stepped aside. He did not know what else to do. Nobody did. The rulebook had not prepared any of them for the moment when the thing they had muzzled and chained and chemically erased looked them in the face and asked, with absolute authority, to be allowed to save their lives. Rami turned to Drell, who had followed him the entire way and was standing in the doorway, gray fur matted with sweat and terror. "The reactor section," Rami said. "The swarm is nesting there. How long before it goes critical?" Drell checked his scanner. His four hands were shaking so badly that he nearly dropped it. "Hours," Drell said. "Maybe less." Rami nodded. He already knew what came next. Nobody volunteered. Rami had not expected them to. The reactor section sat at the core of Dawnmere Station, buried beneath layers of shielding and reinforced bulkheads. Under normal conditions, it ran hot. 60 degrees at the outer ring, 80 near the core housing. The kind of heat that cooked Tessavari skin in minutes and turned Finucci neural tissue to mush. Even the Garathi, the toughest non-human species on the station, would last maybe 20 minutes before their circulatory systems failed. But Rami was from Earth. His ancestors had hunted on open savannas under a sun that baked the ground to cracking. They had crossed deserts on foot. They had worked in foundries, in engine rooms, in mines so deep the rock was warm to the touch. Heat was not a human weakness. Heat was a human environment. Drell stood in front of the reactor access hatch, all four arms crossed, blocking the way. For a Finucci who weighed perhaps 40 kilograms and whose entire species had evolved to avoid confrontation, it was an absurdly brave gesture. "You do not have to do this," Drell said. "You do not owe these people anything. They put an implant in your head and made you carry their boxes for 9 years." Rami looked at him, really looked at him, with unsedated eyes that could finally read the full depth of another being's expression. Drell was terrified, not of the reactor, not of the swarm. He was terrified of losing the only person on this station who had ever treated him like a friend, even through the fog of chemical suppression. "Drell," Rami said, "I spent 9 years unable to feel anything. No fear, no anger, no love, nothing. And now I can feel all of it, and it hurts, and it is the most incredible thing that has ever happened to me." He put his hand on the Finucci's shoulder, gently, the way he had learned to touch the smaller species. "I'm not going in there because I owe them. I am going in because I finally remember what it feels like to care whether people live or die. And I am not wasting that." Drell stared up at him. Then he stepped aside, because there was nothing he could say to a man who had just described the most fundamental human experience in the simplest possible words, and meant every one of them. Rami took a fire extinguisher from the emergency station. He took a welding torch from the maintenance bay. He wrapped his forearms in insulation strips from a supply locker, crude protection against the heat. It was not much. It was what he had. He opened the reactor access hatch, and the heat hit him like a wall. 62 degrees at the entrance. It would climb. He stepped through, and the hatch sealed behind him. The reactor section was a cathedral of pipes and conduits and cooling towers, all of it bathed in the amber glow of the reactor core at its center. And covering every surface, clustered in thick, pulsing masses, was the brood swarm nest. Thousands of eggs lined the walls, translucent and veined with dark fluid. Adult drones crawled over them, tending, feeding, guarding. The heat was their incubator. The reactor's warmth was giving birth to an army that would consume the entire station within days. Rami moved forward. The temperature climbed. 65, 70. His skin flushed red. Sweat poured off him in sheets, his body's cooling system working overtime, doing what 2 million years of evolution had designed it to do, keeping his core temperature stable, keeping his brain alive, keeping him moving when any other species in the cooperative would have collapsed. The drones noticed him at 73 degrees. They came fast, dropping from the ceiling, swarming from the walls. Rami used the fire extinguisher first, blasting clouds of cold chemical foam that sent them scattering, their heat-adapted bodies recoiling from the sudden temperature drop. When the extinguisher ran dry, he switched to the welding torch, sweeping arcs of blue flame that cut through chitin like paper. He took hits. A drone slashed his back. Another latched onto his leg, and he felt its mandibles punch through his trousers and into the muscle beneath. He grunted, ripped it away, and kept going. Pain was information now, not punishment. His body cataloged it and moved on, allocating resources the way a combat system allocates ammunition. Not wasting energy on screaming, spending it on survival. He reached the reactor control panel at 81 degrees. His vision was blurring. His hands were shaking from dehydration as much as adrenaline. The panel was partially damaged by the swarm. Organic resin caked over half the controls. He scraped it away with his bare hands and studied what remained. Primary shutdown was gone. The swarm had eaten through the control cables. But the secondary coolant system was intact. The cryogenic reserves, meant for emergency core cooling, sat in pressurized tanks connected to a network of pipes that ran through the entire reactor chamber. If he opened them all at once, the temperature would drop from 80 degrees to -40 in seconds. It would kill every brood swarm organism in the section. It would save the station. It would also freeze him alive. Rami stood at the panel. The heat pressed against him from every direction. Drones were regrouping behind him. He had maybe 90 seconds before they overwhelmed him. He thought about Noor. Not the way she died. The way she lived. Her laugh. The way she used to steal his coffee and drink it while making eye contact, daring him to complain. The way she would call him at 3 in the morning just to tell him about a dream she had. He'd spent 9 years with that memory locked behind chemical glass. And now it was here, warm and real and alive in his chest. And he realized that this was what the implant had truly taken from him. Not his strength, not his reflexes, his reasons. The people and moments and feelings that made a human willing to do the impossible. He pulled the release lever. The cryogenic system erupted. White fog blasted through every pipe in the chamber. The temperature plummeted so fast that the moisture in the air crystallized instantly, turning the entire reactor section into a frozen cathedral. The brood swarm died in waves, their bodies cracking and shattering as the cold hit them. Eggs burst. Drones curled and fell like dead leaves. The cold reached Rami last. It hit his sweat-soaked body, and the shock was absolute. His muscles locked. His vision went white. He slid down against the reactor panel and sat on the floor as frost formed on his skin, on his eyelashes, on the blood still running from his wounds. He was smiling, not because he wanted to die, but because for the first time in 9 years, he had done something that mattered, and he had felt every second of it. His last conscious thought before the cold took him was simple. I remember you, Noor. I remember everything. Then there was only ice and silence, and the quiet settling of a station that had just been saved by the one species the galaxy had tried to erase. The human heart beats roughly 100,000 times per day. It does this without being asked, without instructions, without motivation, without any conscious decision to keep going. It simply does because that is what human hearts do. They persist. They endure. They refuse, at the most fundamental biological level, to stop. Rami's heart did not stop. The rescue team found him 19 hours after the cryogenic release, slumped against the reactor control panel in a chamber that had dropped to -37 degrees. His skin was blue-white. Frost covered him like a second skin. His pulse was so faint that the Tessavari scanner missed it entirely, and it was Drell who detected it, pressing his small Finuki ear against Rami's chest and hearing what no machine could find. A heartbeat. Slow. Stubborn. Still going. Hypothermic shutdown. The human body's last defense against cold. Blood pulled inward to the core. Heart rate dropped to almost nothing. Brain activity reduced to a whisper. Not death. Hibernation. The body of a species that had survived ice ages doing exactly what it was designed to do when the cold came. Playing dead until the world got warm again. They carried him to the medbay. Drell supervised the rewarming process with the kind of obsessive attention that bordered on panic. Heated fluids, thermal blankets, core temperature monitoring every 30 seconds. He did not leave Rami's side for 3 days. Others came. Sifra sat in the corner with her children, their small compound eyes watching the human on the bed with an intensity that went beyond curiosity. Burel, the Garathi mechanic, stood in the doorway for hours, his broken leg in a brace, saying nothing. The two Tessavari children Rami had carried to safety kept trying to sneak into the med bay, and eventually the staff stopped trying to keep them out. Even Overseer Palin came, though he stood at a distance, crystalline hands clasped behind his back, his face unreadable. On the third day, Rami opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was Drell, asleep in a chair beside his bed, all four arms crossed over his chest, gray fur matted and unwashed. The second thing he saw was the viewport across the medbay wall, showing the gas giant in all its amber glory, storms swirling in patterns he had stared at 1,000 times before. But this time he could feel it. The beauty of it hit him in the chest like a fist. Not the muted, distant awareness of something that should be beautiful. The real thing. The ache of seeing something so vast and ancient and indifferent to suffering that it became, somehow, a comfort. The universe did not care, and there was a strange freedom in that. It meant that every act of caring, every choice to help, every moment of reaching toward another being in the dark was not obligation. It was defiance. Rami's eyes filled with tears. He let them come. Drell woke to the sound of Rami breathing. The Finuki startled upright, knocked a medical tray off the table with two of his arms, and then froze when he saw Rami looking at him. "You are alive," Drell said. "Apparently. Your heart should have stopped. At that temperature for that duration, every medical text in the cooperative says you should be dead. Human hearts are not very good at following instructions," Rami said. Drell made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. It was the most emotion Rami had ever heard from the Finuki, and it cracked something open between them that the Sedation had always kept sealed. Not just friendship, understanding. The kind that only forms when two people have walked through something terrible together and come out the other side, still breathing. Later that day, Palin entered the med bay. He carried a small case. Inside it, resting on velvet padding, was a new sedation implant. Standard issue. Galactic Cooperative approved. Ready for installation. "The law requires this," Palin said. His voice was formal, rehearsed. The voice of a bureaucrat who had practiced this speech in front of a mirror. "All humans residing on cooperative stations must maintain active sedation implants per Statute 47, Section - No," Rami said. Palin paused. "The statute is clear." Then changed the statute. Palin opened his mouth, closed it. He looked at the implant in its case, then at the human sitting upright in bed, bandaged and burned and frost-scarred, and looking at him with eyes that had no chemical fog between them. Eyes that were tired and sad and warm and absolutely, unmistakably awake. "I did not save this station because my implant broke," Rami said. "I saved it because my implant broke and I remembered what I am. Not what I can do. What I am. I am someone who runs toward the screaming. That is not a disease. That is not a threat. That is what my species does. And you do not get to take it from me again." The silence that followed was not hostile. It was the silence of a room full of beings recalculating something they had believed their entire lives. Humans were dangerous. That was true. But dangerous was not the same as evil. And the galaxy had spent so long guarding against what humans could destroy that it had never once considered what humans could save. Drell spoke first. He pulled me from a collapsing corridor. I would have died. Sifra spoke next from her corner. He protected my children when no one else would have. He did not see insects. He saw children. Burel shifted in the doorway. He set my leg, carried me, told me a stupid joke to keep me moving. Something about a Garathi and a revolving door. It was not funny. I laughed anyway. One by one, the survivors of Dahmir Station spoke. Not grand testimonies. Small ones. A bandage. A steady hand. A voice in the dark saying you are alive. Keep walking. I am right here. Palin looked at the implant in his hands. Then he closed the case. He did not say anything. He simply turned and walked away. And in the absence of his decision was a decision in itself. Not approval. Not yet. But the first crack in a wall that had stood since the day the galaxy decided humans were too much. 3 weeks later, Rami stood at the viewport on level 12. The same viewport. The same gas giant. The same storms turning in their ancient patterns below. But he was different. He pressed his hand to the glass. It was cold. He felt it completely. He felt the warmth of the station behind him, the hum of the life support in his bones, the distant sound of Drell humming a Finuki lullaby in the med bay down the hall. He could smell food from the canteen, and for the first time in 9 years, he was hungry. Actually hungry. The kind of hunger that meant his body wanted to live and was not ashamed to say so. His eyes were wet. He did not wipe them. Behind his right ear, where the implant used to sit, there was only a scar, small and rough and permanent, a reminder of what had been taken and what he had taken back. He pressed his forehead against the glass. The gas giant turned below him, vast and ancient and beautiful beyond words. And for the first time in 9 years, the universe pressed back. They had tried to make him less. They had forgotten that you cannot sedate a soul.